Open your Bibles with me, please, to the book of 1 John. To the book of 1 John. The message today is going to be one of the most important messages that I will deliver this year. I'm asking you to listen intently. I'm asking you to follow along in your Bibles with me and see the scriptures for yourselves. These are going to be very, very important. I realize that the vast majority of Christians across America will reject this message out of hand. I am absolutely 100% convinced that what I'm going to be talking about today, if followed, would save our republic, would restore liberty in our country, would take us off of the path of destruction that we are currently on, and would bring God's favor back to our nation. But it's going to present truths that very few people are willing to deal with, much less accept. So I'm asking you to go through this with me very carefully, and let's see what God's Word has to say. And if there's anything that this message can do to help anyone, those that are not only in this room, but those who are going to be watching this message in months and years to come, online or on video, to bring back a sense of normalcy to our country, then the message will be worthwhile. But I go into it understanding that many, many people are going to reject out of hand what the essence of this message was going to say. It doesn't change the truth of it one whit. It just means that we are in a generation of people who literally, including Christians and churches, who literally do not want the truth. They do not want the truth. They want to be fed lies. They want to feel good. They want to believe in something that isn't so. And anything that challenges their comfort zone is immediately repudiated out of hand. The problem is not the truth. The problem is the people who refuse to regard truth as truth. I ask that we have as little moving around as possible, so as to have as little distraction among the people as possible. Let me start out by just saying this. America's biggest problems are not, capital letters, liberal Democrats, as disgusting as many of them are, or Muslims, or Russia, or Iran, etc., etc., etc. Those are not America's biggest problems. And a word of strong counsel to you. Stop. Cease. Desist from reading or listening to this so-called QAnon source that's spreading pure propaganda. I promise you, QAnon is as phony can be. There is not an ounce of truth to it. It is pure propaganda baloney. And if you are listening and giving any credence to QAnon, you are being deceived. You are being propagandized in a major, major way. None of these predictions that this fellow or group of fellows, whoever they are, this cabal of propagandists that are putting this out, are going to take place. None of it is true. It's all a hoax. I'm telling you, QAnon is a hoax. And if you are listening to it, you are listening to a pack of lies and deception. Number two, stop listening to the warmongers who are itching for a war with Iran. The same warmongers that took us into a never-ending war in Iraq and Afghanistan are the same ones that are about to take us into a never-ending war with Iran and Syria. It's all a part of the globalist conspiracy to entangle the United States into a never-ending, perpetual, everlasting war on terror, which there is no such thing as a war on terror. Terror is a strategy. How in the world can you fight? How can you have a war against a strategy? That doesn't make sense. It's just salesmanship. It's marketing technique to convince the American people that they are at risk from these foreign powers and we've got to go on the offensive to preserve America, etc. It's all a bunch of contrived, manipulated propaganda. For example, I'm hearing now all the time, and the number that keeps coming out is 35. They say there are 35 Iranian Hezbollah Islamic terror camps in the United States ready to strike. Really? Question. If they know how many Islamic terror camps there are, they also must know where they are. So if they know where they are, why do not they go take them out? Think, people. Think. This is nothing more than a precursor to put fear in the hearts of the American people, which will help them to accept this war on Iran that is about to be launched. I have already documented in my columns that the vast majority of the so-called Islamic terror cells that they find periodically around the country, and I've documented this, are nothing more than FBI false flag operations. The FBI created the terror cells. They set them up. They supplied them with the ammunition and the weapons. They brought in their agent provocateurs and they galvanized them. Who knows? They might have even brought in Israeli Mossad to pretend that they are Islamic extremists. The Mossad does that in the Middle East all of the time and in Eastern Europe. A lot of these so-called Islamic terrorists that you are... I'm not saying that there aren't any Islamic terrorists. There most certainly are. Don't construe something I'm not saying. But I am telling you that much of this is nothing more than Mossad organized and manipulated false flag events in order to continue to stir the pot of war on behalf of the State of Israel. And America falls for it hook, line, and sinker. And the American people, especially conservatives and Christians and Republicans, fall for it hook, line, and sinker. I'm telling you, stop listening to QAnon. It's a bunch of phony propaganda garbage. There's not a bit of truth to it. And stop listening to the warmongers who are trying to take us into another war in the Middle East. As sincerely as I know how to say it, any problems that we are having with any of these other issues that we could talk about, the Marxist bent of Democrats, the anti-liberty, anti-constitution, anti-republicanism sentiment that seems to be growing in certain elements of our society, these wars with other nations that keep propping up one after the other. All these things, the stuff that isn't manipulated and isn't created intentionally, which most of it is. Who was the president? Was it Roosevelt or Truman who said, when it comes to politics, there's no such thing as coincidences? It's very true. Most of these situations that we're talking about on the news every day and that people are getting all psyched up about are manipulations of those who have the power and the means to do so in order to bring America into this globalistic one world, new world order that has been in the making for 100 years or more. It's a manipulation. Most of it is manipulation. Hardly any of it is coincidence or circumstantial or spontaneous. It's planned for the most part. Which means that we are dealing with an enemy that is very, very narrow in scope, very defined in purpose. It is a very organized, orchestrated, deliberate plan being carried out by a very, very powerful, sizable cabal of people who are manipulating the public opinion of the American people and the churches of America, because the pastors are worthless, in terms of giving information and perspective by the mainstream media which they control. But everything that happens, and through the things that I've already mentioned, are symptoms of the problem. They are not the problem. The liberal socialist Democrats are not the problem. Maxine Waters is not the problem. The Iranian Muslim Shiites are not the problem. The problem is something entirely different. These are symptoms of the problem. If you are in a ship or on a ship and a hole appears in the side of that ship and water begins to fill up the ship, you can paddle water, you can bail water with a bucket all you want. You can knock yourself out bailing water with a bucket, trying to get the water out. But you're not going to solve the problem until you plug the hole. We have a huge hole in the ship of state in the United States. And everybody's going around with their buckets trying to bail out the water. And they're bailing out the water with the Muslims, and they're bailing out the water with the liberal social democrats, and they're bailing out the water with Maxine Waters, and they're bailing out the water with all these things that they come up with as the problems. And they bail water, bail water, bail water, bail water, and nothing changes. Let me ask you something. Is anything getting any better? Republicans control the entire federal government. Are things getting any better? Donald Trump and his fellow Republicans in Washington, D.C. are spending money, borrowed money, deficit spending, like there's no tomorrow. I wrote about it in my column this week. Republicans in D.C. they are the only ones that can spend the amount of money that they spend. They spend as much money as Democrats talk about spending. They spend as much money as Democrats wish they could spend. $1 trillion deficits. The widest deficit spending increase in 6 years since 2013 under Barack Obama. A 20% increase in deficit spending in 2018 compared to 2017. A $1 trillion increase in deficit spending, and the Republicans control the entire federal purse. Don't tell me the Republicans in D.C. are fiscally conservative. Don't tell me they care anything about balancing a budget or reducing the cost and the size of the federal government. They don't. It is all a hoax, smoke and mirrors. We're bailing water. We're bailing water. We're bailing water, and it's not working because the hole is in the ship and the water is flooding in faster than we're able to bail it out. You've got to plug the hole. Here's the hole in the ship of state in the United States. Here is the gigantic, huge, big hole of which everything that we're dealing with is simply symptomatic of the fact that we have a hole in the ship that needs to be filled up. The hole is the evangelical church and the pastors of this country. The pastors of America have always been the compass of the country. The pastors of America have always had it within their power to direct the course of the nation. There is no other single entity within this country, including anybody in Washington, D.C., that has the power to influence the people and to direct the political affairs of state as do the pulpits of this country. They have more power than the media. They have more power than the Congress. They have more power than the bully pulpit of the President of the United States. The pastors of America are the hole that is in the ship of state. There is not a problem that we face as a country that could not be resolved if the pastors of America showed the leadership, the wisdom, and the conviction, not to mention courage, that they need to have as men of God in the pulpits. I am absolutely positively serious about this statement. The pastors are the big hole. We have not direction, conviction, understanding, resolve. It's all about feeling good. It's all about entertainment. It's all about building buildings and building congregations and offerings. It's all about notoriety, prestige, popularity, etc., etc. And the ship of state is sinking because the pastors, for the most part, I realize there's exceptions. I know several men of whom would not qualify for this indictment. Good men that are preaching the truth every Sunday of various denominations. Most of their congregations are small. Most of them are preaching to but a few people on a given Sunday. But they are preaching the truth. But they are far and few between, or few and far between. Here are the 6 things that pastors either are preaching wrongly, or not preaching at all, or ignoring, or whatever. But these are the 6 principles that form that huge hole in our ship of state. I'm going to give you 6 things, and I'm not going to elaborate on each one, but I hope that you will write these down. I hope that you will remember these 6 things. And when you hear a pastor preach, if these 6 things are noticeable in that pastor's ministry, he is the problem in America. He is why the ship of state is sinking. Everybody thinks that we're going to elect our way out of our problems. That politicians are going to save us. Politicians have never been the salvation of a country. God, through His prophets and preachers, are the salvation of a country. Let me give you these 6 things. Number 1, they willingly cower behind the 501c3 Internal Revenue Code. They will do most anything to maintain their precious tax-exempt status, including compromising their messages to comply with IRS requirements. If that church is a 501c3 church, very, very few pastors of a corporate church have the courage to defy the rules and regulations of the Internal Revenue Code in their preaching. They just don't do it. You will find one every now and then that will. I'm not saying there are not any. There are some. I was a pastor of a 501c3 church for 35 years. And every year or so, or maybe less, I would get a very nice, glossy, printed, full color brochure in the mail from a law firm, usually a law firm. Never directly from the IRS. It was from a lawyer representing the IRS. And in the brochure, it would tell me As a 501c3 pastor, here's what I can say and what I can't say. Here's what I can do and what I can't do, and there's bullet points. And as a church, 501c3, here's what it can do and here's what it can't do, bullet points. I totally, completely, and with much enthusiasm ignored the brochure. I ignored it. Threw it in the wastebasket. I wish now I'd saved some of those so I could still have them. I talked to a pastor just this past week. He says he's still got some of his, and I encouraged him to send me a copy. I hope he doesn't forget and sends me one. I want to be reminded of what they say. But every church in America gets one of those periodically. And I promise you, the pastors, they don't do what I did. They don't just throw it in the garbage. They put that brochure up someplace prominently in their desk or on their wall or someplace in a file where they can refer to it, and they will review those do's and don'ts and those pluses and minuses. They'll memorize it. They will rehearse those things with their staff, with their deacons and trustees and elders and other people in the church. They will review those things, and they will make sure that they are in compliance with the Internal Revenue Code. They will even have conferences in their churches once in a while. Every few years or so, the bigger churches will have them, maybe even more often than that. But most churches will have them once in a while, where they will bring in some IRS attorneys, and they will have a conference, or at least a meeting with the church officials, the officers of the church, the leaders of the church, and they will sit down with the attorney, and the attorney will get up and talk about how important it is that the church have a good testimony with the federal government. How important it is that the church have a good testimony with the IRS. That's part of God's plan. And then they'll go through all these do's and don'ts, and if there's any questions, they'll have questions, and they'll go back and forth. And whenever the conference is over, everybody will leave feeling really, really, really good about sucking up and compromising the message to the Internal Revenue Service. So, every church that is 501c3 compliant is a part of the big hole in the ship of state. You want to solve the problem? Get the churches out of the IRS. Had a lady, a Trump toady, write me on my Facebook page this week or last week, and it said something about, don't you know that Donald Trump signed an executive order dismissing the Johnson Amendment, and the Johnson Amendment no longer applies. That's the 501c3 section of the Internal Revenue Code. That's what it's called, the Johnson Amendment. Lyndon Johnson's the one that got it put in 1954. And he signed, and he did sign an executive order. Here's the problem. A presidential executive order cannot overturn a law enacted by Congress. Only Congress can remove the Johnson Amendment from the Internal Revenue Code. It was an act of Congress that put it there. It'll have to be an act of Congress that gets rid of it, and Congress is not going to get rid of it. You know why? Because the pastors and the churches themselves are the ones who want the Johnson Amendment to stay in place. Number two, they have taught an unscriptural, erroneous, and enslaving interpretation of Romans 13 that has turned courageous Christian men into sniveling subjects of the state. Anytime you hear a pastor, a preacher, a televangelist, a radio preacher talk about Romans 13 with the context that the Bible teaches that Christians are to always obey the state, is a part of the whole in the ship of state in America. Christian men of history were the most courageous, independent-minded, God-fearing men that you would find anywhere, anytime. It was the Christian men of Lexington who stood on Lexington Green in front of 800 British soldiers and refused them access to take Sam Adams and John Hancock prisoner, and would refuse to let them take the firearms that were cached in Concord. It was Christian men who understood that civil authority, just like any other authority given to man, is limited and jurisdictional in scope. That a Christian has no king but Jesus in his heart. That King George was not his king. Those British troops were not their king. And the British law that required the seizing of those two patriots, Adams and Hancock, and the seizing of those firearms at Concord were not in accordance with the natural laws of God and the biblical laws of liberty. And 75 or 6 Christian men stood on Lexington Green and through their efforts fired the shot heard round the world that began America's war for independence. Christian men. The difference between the men of Lexington in 1775 and the men of America in 2018 is they do not have pastors like Jonas Clark in their pulpits. They're taught submission to government constantly. They're taught compliance, submit, constantly. If you watch much Christian television, and if you do, I feel sorry for you. And if you listen to much Christian radio, and you listen to a lot of these Christian, you cannot go a week. You cannot go a week without hearing a pastor propagandize about Romans chapter 13. It's constant, ubiquitous. They've taken courageous Christian men and turned them into sniveling subjects of the state. That's a part of this big whole. Number 3, they have abandoned the great Christian beatitude, "Blessed are the peacemakers," and have become cheerleaders for the neocon warfare state. I saw some clips this week as I was preparing this message of some charismatic churches and some Baptist churches. I think all the ones I looked at were either charismatic, Assembly of God, or Baptist denominations. And I saw the clips of these pastors as they were literally implanting war fever in the hearts of their people, as they were promoting war of aggression against Iran and Syria and other Middle Eastern nations. And I mean, I was watching those clips, and those preachers sounded just like Goebbels and the other propagandists of the Nazi Third Reich as they were promoting war fever among the people of Germany in the 1920s and 30s. If you closed your eyes and if the subject matter was a little different, you were listening to the propagandists of Nazi Germany in 2018 so-called Christian churches in America. War, 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 war. Christians used to be known, because this is the way Jesus taught us 2,000 years ago, that they were among those who were the quickest to try and promote peace. Christians were known as being peacemakers. Today, evangelical Christians are among the most enthusiastic warmongers in the whole country. No one cheers for war like Christians. No one demands war like Christians. No one wants war like Christians. The Church of America has become a warmongering church. There is no such thing as peacemaking anymore in the vast majority of churches. It's all about promoting war. War and more war. I hope you understand the things I'm talking about here are things that God cannot bless in His church. God cannot bless churches and pastors who grovel before the government. God cannot bless churches who have an unscriptural teaching relative to government in Romans chapter 13 and place government as God in the hearts of their people. God cannot bless a church that is not a church that believes in peace and has a heart promoting peace and desiring peace. A war-filled church cannot be blessed by God. Number 4, they have become little more than glorified sycophants of the Republican Party and of Republican presidents in particular. The standards and principles they profess to believe do not apply to the Republican Party. And by their actions, or should I say inaction, Republican presidents are above the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the natural laws of God, including God's law of nations. Whenever a Democrat is in the White House, and whenever a Republican is in the White House, means nothing to me when it comes to the principles of truth, biblical truth, natural law truth, the Constitution, Bill of Rights, Declaration of Independence. When it comes to those fundamental principles of truth, I stand for and against the exact same things. The difference is when a Democrat's in the White House, I am a hero. Oh, I'm helping the cause of freedom. I'm a freedom fighter. I'm a patriot. But when a Republican is in the White House and he does the same things that the Democrat would do and ignores the same principles of truth and law that the Democrat did, and I call him on the same carpet as I called the Democrat, now I am a villain. And people curse me And call me every name in the book. In Jesus' name, of course. The principles don't change. If deficit spending is unconstitutional, immoral, bankrupting our country, ruining the future generations of America, if it was wrong when Barack Obama was doing it, it's wrong when Donald Trump is doing it. It's a part of the whole. Whenever the Democrat is in, then they are all energized about standing for truth and standing for the Constitution, standing for limited spending and limited government and limited war and all these things. They stand up for all of that. But as soon as a Republican goes in, all those values and principles go right out the window. You don't hear anything about it. Oh, we don't want to say anything bad about this Republican president because he's better off than the Democrat. What's that got to do with anything? Where is it written that because you vote for somebody, that means for the next 4 years you've got to go along with every unconstitutional thing that comes off of their desk? In fact, truth is, if they profess to be conservative, if they profess to be constitutional, if they profess to be in favor of limited government and pro-life and all these kind of things, issues that we believe in, we should be more eager to make sure that they abide by what they said they would do. I'm telling you, and this is where the churches are. Number 5, they've traded unpopular truth for the God of success. Big buildings, big offerings, large staff, notoriety, popularity, etc. They've traded unpopular truth in order to keep people coming in. Building their crowds, building their offerings, building their staff, building their programs. Success, success, success. And truth is the loser. This is the real problem in America. Not the Muslims, not the liberal Democrats, not the news media. This is America's biggest problem. Straighten out the pulpits of America and you will solve America's political problems. It is a church problem. It is a preacher problem. It is a pulpit problem. And lastly, number 6. They have allowed themselves to be blinded by the Zionist state of Israel. They willingly refuse to see the pervasive evil influence that Israel exerts over America. In fact, most of our evangelical pastors and churches are complicit in that evil.